former Vice President Joe Biden seems primed to be at the head of a crowded Democratic 2020 field. But his role as a leading architect in America's crackdown on drugs could be a major liability for his campaign.
I think the problem with Joe Biden isn't that he was a passenger on the drug war train, he was driving it.
In 1988, as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Biden co-sponsored the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. The bill led to new mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenders and created a sentencing rule that led to stiffer punishments for crack cocaine users than those who used powder cocaine. In 1989, when then-President George H.W. Bush called for $8 billion to help law enforcement in the war against drugs, Biden said it was inadequate and called for stricter punishments for both drug users and dealers.
The president says he wants to wage a war on drugs, but if that's true, what we need is another D-Day, not another Vietnam, not another limited war fought on the cheap and destined for stalemate and human tragedy.
Then in 1994, Biden spearheaded the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, a bill that touched nearly every aspect of law enforcement and is credited for leading to a boom in for-profit prisons and mass incarceration. And while every other candidate in the 2020 Democratic primary supports marijuana legalization or decriminalization, Biden hasn't jumped on the 420 bandwagon yet. His position on marijuana itself hasn't wavered much over the years. In 2010, he said legalization would be a mistake, and he's been relatively mum on the issue since.
Any person today who is a serious candidate for any high elected office, who doesn't really look at marijuana, at least decriminalization, if not legalization, as what is needed in this country as a baseline, if somebody doesn't take that position, it's going to be really hard for them to convince people who have criminal justice reform as a top issue that they're a serious candidate.
Ed Chung, who served as a senior policy advisor on criminal justice, policing, and civil rights issues under the Obama-era Justice Department, says Biden can still make the case that his views have evolved along with the country when it comes to drug policy.
And the question is, what policies and what positions is he going to take now as a president, and is it going to be a continuation of some of the things that he was championed under the Obama administration?
But Collins says there's not much Biden can do or say that will erase the damage of his former policies.
It's one thing to apologise, right? I think it's very easy to apologise. It's another thing to actually sit down with the communities impacted by the war on drugs, predominantly communities of colour, and ask, should I become president? What can I do to repair the damage? The damage of mass incarceration, the damage of that tough on crime approach.